Sırada gerçekten dünya çapında büyük bir etki yaratmış, toplumsal cinsiyet eşitliği mücadelesinde küresel bir lider var. Erkeklerin bu mücadelede nasıl aktif bir rol oynayabileceğini tüm dünyaya gösteren öncü isimlerden biri.
Ekomondo'nun kurucu başkanı Gary Parker yıllardır erkeklerin toplumsal cinsiyet eşitliğine katkısını arttırmak konusunda dünya çapında çalışmalarda bulunuyor. Onun bu alandaki vizyonu profeminizmin hareketi içinde büyük bir katkı sağladı.
Barker, küresel profeminizm hareketinin öncülerinden biri olarak erkeklerin sadece bu mücadelenin destekçisi değil, aynı zamanda aktif bir katılımcısı olması gerektiğini savunan en etkili isimlerden biri. Erkeklerin toplumsal cinsiyet eşitliği savunuculuğundaki kritik rolünü ve bu alanda nasıl daha güçlü bir değişim yaratabileceğimizi ele alacak.
Şimdi alkışlarınızla Washington'dan bizim için hazırladığı videoyu seyrediyoruz.
Thanks, colleagues, for inviting me to give this talk. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I will get to meet some of you early next year. I'm speaking to you today the week of International Men's Day, and it feels like an appropriate week to talk about where are men in the world on these topics of gender equality, of empowering women, and our own well-being. Thought I might start with just an overview of the degree of the challenges that we're up to. We've got to start with an understanding that about 1 in 4 women experiences violence from a man in her lifetime. That is violence from men. Violence carried out. Most of us who are here are not part of that, but we know about it. We are around. It is our brothers, our friends, our workmates who are carrying out this violence. We have to look at conflict in the world. We have more armed conflicts happening right now than at any moment since World War II. It is mostly men whose lives are being lost. It is mostly men making those decisions for conflict, for armed violence over peace. If we look at leadership in our parliaments and congresses around the world, men are 70%. We still have not achieved full equality in terms of political representation. If we look at wages, women still make on average about 20% less than us as men. No country in the world has achieved equality when it comes to equality in wage equality in the workplace. And equally, no country has achieved equality in terms of men doing half of the care work at home. That's the part that we need to engage in terms of our duty to achieve a gender equitable world. But I also want to step into, and as I talk about men's stake in a gender equitable world, to also say that we as men benefit and need to talk about that. Men on average around the world die between 3 and 5 years earlier than women. About 2 years of that is related to biology, how we are biologically as male and female. I think many of you know that in terms of how we are born male, the XY chromosome means that we are more vulnerable to certain problems. So part of the reason that we die earlier as men is biology, but the majority of it is related to how we live in the world. If we seek health care when we need it, the kinds of professions that we are involved in, the risk-taking, external violence, suicide. Men are 3/4 to 2/3 of suicides globally. Women attempt suicide more than men do. Men achieve suicide much more often because we do not seek help. So I give all those examples to say that we as men have a stake in a gender equitable world, but we also live better when we embrace gender equality. Surveys that we've carried out as Equimundo around the world find that men who believe in a version of manhood that is more about connection, collaboration, partnership, who don't think their role is to dominate women, who don't think violence is an okay way to get what you want, we as men who believe in that new version of masculinity, to call it that, we live better. We are happy in our relationships, less likely to be depressed, and less likely to carry out certain risks that bring harm to ourselves. So with that, I want to step into how do we engage men to achieve a more gender equitable world. I want to start off with maybe a kind of wake-up call, which is that my organization, Equimundo, has been carrying out global research for the last 10 plus years through a survey called the International Men and Gender Equality Survey. We've done this in more than 50 countries, including all regions of the world. And there's one big conclusion that although huge differences across countries, there is one big finding that is worth paying attention to. Everywhere we look, young men either have the same gender inequitable views of their fathers and grandfathers or slightly worse, whereas everywhere in the world, young women are demanding and believe in gender equality more than their mothers' and grandmothers' generation. So we essentially have a graph that goes like men are going this way, women going this way. We have not figured out a way to engage men, and particularly the younger generation of men, to see how gender equality benefits them and to help them see why they must be part of it. Why do we think that's the case? We have a generation of young men around the world who feel, in many cases, very economically fragile or precarious. We heard a young man online in the US say recently, "Hey, other men, do you ever worry about the fact that you'll be less better off financially than your father and grandfather and you don't know how to talk about it?" Question mark. He had more than 10,000 responses of other men saying, yes, we feel that fear too. Many men, particularly lower income men, men with less than university education, feel the world is quite fragile, and they are right in many ways. We've not achieved equality for women by any means. We have much to do, but young men, particularly this generation of young men looking for a space in the workplace in the face of massive migration in the world, massive changes in the workplace, massive movement of industries and work and modes of production around the world, of things like natural disasters that cause stresses on economies. Men who mostly define ourselves as providers feel like the world is very unsure. And in those moments, we don't tend to be very generous about stepping into gender equality. But we must. Because the same sense of emotional, social, economic precarity that many men feel is leading to harmful policies. We see how it relates to the election of very authoritarian leaders who, in the long run, don't have the best interest of their countries and their citizens at heart. So we as men are part of a huge problem. We have a huge sense of disconnection and loneliness. Many countries in Europe and the US are seeing large numbers of young men who report they don't spend very much time interacting with others. They spend much of their lives on these things, getting their social lives, their dating, and lots of other things online, and we know what's happening there. So all of that is to say we've got to figure out what's up with young men. There is, in some parts of the world, a global crisis of connection for young men. Many young men are just fine making it into the workplace, finding a partner, starting a family, but lots of men feel a sense of economic precarity and of social confusion about who they are. Many men are also reacting to the advances of the women's equality agenda. Me Too and movements in many countries have said to men, you will be called out if you cause harm. Many diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are rightfully and necessarily calling attention to inequality in industries and in workplaces. It is fantastic that we are holding ourselves as men accountable. But are we also calling men into a conversation of how we must be allies and also how we benefit when we embrace gender equality? Some colleagues of ours in the UK, they run an organization called New Macho that works in the workplace, particularly around marketing and communication around healthy masculinities. And they did a survey a couple of years back, finding that some men are finding new definitions of success, beginning to talk less about financial success and material things, but also wanting daily happiness, a meaningful partnership relationship, a marriage, a life partner. And they're also beginning to care more about their own health and well-being. There is a generation of men that says success is not just what I conquer. Success is who I connect with, the relationships I build, my own well-being in the world, and my well-being with others. The challenge is that our partners at New Macho, and we find this as well, is how much the media and workplaces continue to focus on this version of success for men that is about money quick, who you conquer, who you're with, as opposed to, when I mean who you're with, sexual conquests, etc., continue to sell, if I will call it that, the old macho version of success. How do we step in and think about helping men believe that we are caring, connected, and can be caring and connected humans who define our success not individually, but by those around us? So let's talk about the workplace. We are stagnant when it comes to achieving economic equality for women. Important advances in the last years, but we still have a long way to go. Women's wages compared to men, we've basically reached a point of stagnation. We're not moving beyond that kind of 80%, women's 80% pay compared to men. Again, differs in different parts of the world. There's a huge piece of that, and my organization has been trying to work on it. We've also been an advisor to the World Economic Forum, the folks who organize Davos. And the heart of the gender pay gap resides in who does the care work at home. Across Europe, the US, we're seeing these days that young professionals, young people going into the workplace, men and women, their wages are typically starting about the same. Women's educational attainment has essentially equaled or is surpassing that of men now. In most countries of the world, there are actually more women enrolled in university than men. And that is showing up in the workplace. Sometimes men are having wages that are equal and going into jobs that don't require university education. So that hasn't yet thrown a huge change in terms of income. But here's what we see. Young men, young women entering the workplace, their wages are about the same. That continues until the moment that the couple or she decides to have a child. And at that moment, we see that the care gap, that is, who does the caregiving at home, shifts what happens to their income. Men, when they become fathers, stay in the workplace. They typically see their salaries increase as they look to take on greater responsibilities. There is something of a daddy bonus in the workplace that men often get, which is we think you're more serious when you're a father. We think, oh, now you're really stepping into that provider role. I know that he is going to get it done. We get bonus points as men in the workplace when we become fathers. Women take off paid leave or non-paid leave, or perhaps work part-time, or don't come back to the workplace for a few years, and their wages go like this. So we end up with this crisscrossing of men's wages going up, staying up, and many men playing by the rules think, well, I should stay in this meritocracy, and I should always get these higher wages. It is really a challenge when we take into workplaces after that a conversation around, hey, we have to talk about pay equity, and that means we have to talk about you. As we look at you going up in the workforce and your pay grade and your supervisory title, what does equality look like? What kinds of questions need to be asked so that equality is achieved in this workplace? Many men balk at that question because they think, and they have, played by the rules. We've got to think about systemic ways. We've got to think about how we engage men there. And I do think a huge part there is around engaging men in the daily hands-on care of children. Now, there's some good news on that front. If we're stuck in terms of women's wages, if we're stuck in terms of men's violence against women, if we've got a global crisis of young men feeling a crisis of connection, the good news is that in today's world, men are doing a greater share of the care work at home, and we also seem to be centering that care work more in our lives. And I think that brings a win-win-win and another win. One, when men do more of the hands-on care work at home, their female partners are happier and able to achieve more in the workplace. We see countries where men get higher amounts of paid leave and take that leave. their partner's wages are closer to theirs. We achieve wage equality and women's well-being when men do more of the hands-on care work. Second, children benefit. Having a second caregiver involved as a nurturer and caring and supporting, we see outcomes are better for children in terms of child development. You have in Turkey one of the most impressive national organizations working on this topic, Açıdan, who has been a partner for ours for many years. They talk a lot about this, the importance of engaging men as fathers in the hands-on care of children for better children's outcomes. Third, we see benefits to men ourselves. Men who are more involved and report closer relationships to their children report that they are happier, healthier, have better mental health. We get good lives out of being more involved caregivers. Fourth, societies benefit. Where men do a greater share of the hands-on caregiving at the national level when we measure this in surveys, countries tend to see less violence, and they get closer to achieving gender equality on multiple indicators. And here's the good news as well about this, which is that men, by and large, want to do this. It's not really as much about convincing men to do the hands-on care. It is about making it possible in their lives. In surveys that we've carried out, men tell us they want to do the care work, but it is mostly their jobs, their work life, that keeps them from being able to do the full amount of care work they want to do. The good news is that the gap that we need the workplace to be part of helping us reduce is not that huge. It is reducing. It is now about 2.5 hours more per day that mothers do compared to fathers of hands-on care work, regardless if the two of them are working in paid work. That's the average. Now, none of us are averages, but that's still a good number to start with. A little bit more than 2 hours means that if men did an hour more and women did an hour less, we'd get something close to equality. I often talk with men about, is there one Netflix show or TV show or half of a football match you might not watch that day so you can be more involved in care work? Could we get our workplaces to say, maybe there's a way he does 1 hour of remote work or 1 hour of flexible work so that he can do the care work he wants and needs to do. It's also not just about individual men's behaviors. We have to think about the policies that we need. And the corporate sector is so important in terms of that. We need equal paid leave for mothers and fathers. We continue to hold this notion that moms need leave and dads don't. Where we see equality achieved and well-being for couples and for children are those countries and companies that offer equitable, fully paid leave for both parents. We move away from an idea of a primary parent, almost always the mother, and the secondary parent, almost always the father, and we say, both of you need leave, and we insist that you take it. Even when paid leave is offered, whether in workplaces or by countries, men are taking about half of the available leave, whereas women take about 90% of the available leave. We've got to nudge men to take the leave, to make it equitable for men, and to nudge men to take it. The good news is research that we've carried out in multiple countries find that men want that equitable paid leave. Men want subsidized childcare. Men want support to the lowest income families at rates that are equal to what women tell us they want from policies and policymakers as well. That's why one of our campaigns that we came out with this year is called Vote Like a Dad, getting men to invest in the care economy, what we call the care economy, the policies we all need for our caregiving. As we look across the world, we've got about 80% of adult men, starting to reduce in some countries. Between 80 and 60% of adult men will be or are biological fathers. About 15% of our households globally have one family member or more who's got a disability or a chronic illness. As we become a more aging planet in many parts of the world, Europe, North America, and others to be specific, where there's a larger aging population with fewer number of children. which means more of us are in what we call in English the sandwich generation. Those of us who both have care for children who may be at home or nearby, and elderly parents who also need care. If we look demographically at us, we probably all have about a third of our lives, at least, that we have a primary caregiving responsibility to children, a disabled family member, an elderly family member, and often some combination of all of those. These are policies and services that we all need. We have historically thought these were women's duties, and we now see that is not possible if we want an equitable world. So corporations, workplaces, governments that are thinking about care policies need to think about men as allies, as partners, and as beneficiaries in this whole process. One of the ways we see that we get men to pay more attention to care is when we think about the care that we need as men. I'll go back to International Men's Day, which is this week, November 19th. We know that men have a huge gap when it comes to self-care. We seek health services often far after we actually need them, so we don't go in when there's a health problem, which means we suffer longer-term consequences from chronic or acute illness because we've not sought help at the appropriate time. We carry out multiple forms of risk, whether it's drinking excessively, smoking more than women do, things that we do in traffic, and lots of other ways that we put ourselves at risk. We also aren't very good at asking for emotional help when we need it. Globally, we find that the rates of depression, clinical depression for men and women, are virtually the same. The vast difference is that women are twice as likely to seek either informal help from someone around them or professional help when they experience depression or other mental health needs. Apart from acute mental health, we also just have the daily needs to get by in stressful moments in the world. Men there as well are about half as likely to talk to someone when we feel emotionally vulnerable, a factor that leads to or aggravates other mental health issues, men's drinking, men's suicidal attempts. We found in our research that when men are aware of our own vulnerability and our own emotional well-being, we are better at caring for others. So one of the things we do in our strategies is to say we need men to care for ourselves. We need men to look for help. We need men to acknowledge when we need emotional help, because life does bring, for every human, stresses and particular needs. So essentially the conclusion there is that men who care for themselves care better for others. Caring for men leads to caring men. Let me say that again. If we care about boys and men, if we invest in helping them be better in the world, acknowledging men's mental health needs and health needs, men become more caring humans. It is what we call a virtuous cycle. So what do we need to do? I want to conclude with a few things. I know many of you represent workplaces, corporations. What can you do? One is that there's no single strategy. Men are not the same. We come in a huge diversity of realities and views, stages in our career. Some of us are biological fathers. Some of us are grandfathers. Some of us have 2 generations to care for. Some don't have any except for perhaps ourselves and a partner. There are specific men with disadvantages, mental health needs that we don't know about, specific disabilities that we often don't consider the challenges that men face. We often don't think about men as needing help in the workplace. But we've found, particularly post-COVID and afterwards, a lot of men feeling anxiety, feeling their own sense of confusion in the world, and not asking for help when they need it. So one is just to say there's no single answer for which, I know I'm talking a lot about men in this kind of big category, but it doesn't exist. We are a huge and vast array of humans. And so to look, one step that any workplace needs to say first is to say, let's listen to men. What is up with them? What's going on? I think, as I mentioned earlier before with that study from our partner in the UK called New Macho, that we need to think about men's versions of success. I gave a talk recently at one of the international banks that was very upset. Its employee association was very upset that they were questioning some of the promotion based on merits and looking to become a 50% women leadership within the next 5 years. Many men in positions and senior positions were very upset by that. Where did they find a way that they could put down their defensiveness about it? When they thought about the care they wanted time off to provide, particularly for their elderly parents, acknowledging how there were only a few years left of life of their parents and how they wanted more time to be able to spend that. So I think one is to say let's think about ways in the workplace that we remunerate workers, including senior men, with the things that we need, including flexible time, more time off, perhaps it is sabbaticals. Other ways that say, I don't have to be in that C-suite to feel happy. There are other things in my life that my workplace can help me with that bring me a definition of personal success and of well-being. Third, and not surprising because I've just talked a lot about that, is men's caregiving. I do think we need to lean into the fact that we as men want to provide the care to our households and to others. That care is not something men need to learn, but to be freed to be able to do. I will often bring up, I am a developmental psychologist. I study how humans develop and learn over the lifespan. We have known for centuries that women are wired to care by giving birth, by the way their bodies react hormonally and neurologically to caring for a child. We've known that women are wired to care. We didn't really think about it until about 20 years ago when we started to carry out research about men who care for children. And what does that research tell us? That we as men in contact with children, we also experience hormonal and neurological changes. Scientists who study this have looked at human evolution and now come to the conclusion that our survival as a species during those early days when it wasn't clear we were going to survive as Homo sapiens, we survived because men are also biologically wired to care. Empathy, nurturing, compassion. This is our biological birthright as male and female and non-binary humans. So I'll repeat that again. Men in contact with close children express or experience the neurological and hormonal changes as women do. And it's not only children who are our biological offspring. Men in contact with anybody's child. If we do hands-on care for others, our body biologically attunes to being a nurturing caregiver. I think that's an important point to end on. And to say it's often easy to look and say, men won't change, we are so. We are raised in a world thinking we need to be providers and protectors. Around the world, that's kind of the main way that men define who they are and will be in the world. There is nothing wrong with those. In fact, those are very valid and important ways that we as men and women, I might say, because women can and are providers in many households equally or sometimes more than men. Women can be protectors. Our physical strength compared to women, yes, there's differences, but that is a small portion of what protection means. Protection means lots of things. All to say, let us add to that list of who we are as men to also be carers, caregivers, and nurturers. Because that is where we get to see the best of manhood. That is the best of our humanity. And I do believe that's where we need to go with this work. We do need to call out men who cause harm, who are not supporting equality, who use violence and need to be held accountable. But the bigger challenge and the way forward for me is calling men in to be the caring, supportive humans that I believe we were born to be. Thanks for inviting me, and I look forward to enjoying getting to meet some of you in person next year. All the best for a successful event. Thank you.